Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all the folks around the world that are joining us. My name is Kostya Zolotuski, and this is ISTAT Chats, one of the two initiatives that we are implementing as part of our digital social network to compensate for lack of ability for all of us to get together in person. ISTAT Chats is intended to be a conversation among the luminaries of the industry where they talk about how they grew up in this industry, some of the folklore of the aviation world, and then, of course, opine and express their views about the current environment. And there clearly are a lot of things to talk about in terms of how our current world is affected by the pandemic and where we see our industry going. And what we'd like to do today is we have two market makers, Pete Seidlitz and Gerry Laderman. Both names I think are familiar to most of you, but I'll do a brief introduction. Pete started, I think, right after the Wright brothers figured this thing of a flight out. And Pete started in commercial real estate and quickly understood that it's much more efficient to go with a global mobile real estate and moved into aviation. And that's when he formed about 40 years ago Bristol Associates, which is one of the premier firms in aircraft trade. If you want to do difficult airplanes, difficult jurisdictions, unusual type of aircraft trading, Bristol is the place to go. And Pete has led that organization and has done some incredible deals for a lot of market participants. Gerry Laderman is a household name as well in our world. Gerry has been a key person in driving the evolution of the airline industry. He, after leaving a law practice, he started out at Hughes, Hubbard and Reed. He moved over to Continental as legal counsel and very quickly became their treasurer and head of finance, and most importantly, head of acquisitions or fleet planning for aircraft. And then when Continental merged with United, he continued in that role. And today he is executive vice president of United Airlines and chief financial officer. So without further ado, what I'd like to do is start the conversation. The idea is to maybe first explore some of the industry's highlights and experiences that the two gentlemen have had, some good stories, and then cover the current environment. So with that, Pete and Gerry, welcome. Thank you for joining us. And maybe if both of you could start with how did you get into the industry? What prompted you getting in? Why did you stay in? And some of the colorful stories that were motivational or inspirational to keep you in space. So maybe start with you, Pete. Is that fair?
That's fair. And thank you, Kostya. And I would like to address your comment, which came from an online post by Jeff Lewis at Fortress, who indicated that I have excellent experience as I was involved in aircraft trading during the 1918 pandemic. Now, you have to take that with a grain of salt as it comes from someone who dresses in what I call clown chic outfits. But I did want to correct him in that I did not trade Sopwith Camels, but the faster but harder to place Sopwith Dragon, and of course Bristol F2s. Actually, I started out like a lot of people do, as a particularly creative writing majors like myself, looking for some place to apply your talent, finding none. Defaulted into working in the real estate business originally in Chicago. Then I worked for ITEL, which was a leasing company, and it's, based in San Francisco. Was fired once, rehired, quit. It went bankrupt, but it included the founders and senior management of companies like ACG, Wings, Compass Capital, Pegasus, B of A leasing. I mean, it had some terrific people and was on the forefront in terms of what was going on in the aircraft and finance business in general. So that, and then spent a year at what I call trade school, the Omni International Jet Trading Floor. in Washington, which was they were junkyard dogs, but I learned I actually learned quite a bit about the trading business there, and then but was moved on, and finally, when my wife got pregnant, decided to start a company, and with no money in the bank, and it was a great motivator. It's kind of worked.
Well, Gerry, thank you, Pete.
Yeah, so actually, I haven't yet decided whether I was in the right place at the right time or the wrong place at the wrong time. But when I was an associate at Hughes Hubbard in the corporate department, there was a more senior associate who was doing all of the aircraft financing work for Continental and related airlines. And he announced one day that he was leaving. And so they needed somebody to step in, learn a little bit about aircraft financing, and kind of take over a deal that was going on in the office. And apparently that week I was at the top of the list of needing another assignment. So I got the call from the traffic manager of the department who said, "Hey, I see you have some time. Can you step in, learn about this aircraft financing stuff?" I assumed it would be a one-off kind of transaction. I'd go back to doing all the other things I was doing, but that was 36 years ago. Hasn't yet stopped. So that's how I ended up in the industry.
Well, very good. And both of you have been instrumental in ISTAT. Gerry, you're on the board now. Pete, you have served for many years. You headed up, you chaired ISTAT Foundation. How did ISTAT factor into your adventures in aviation early on, or came later?
Well, from my experience, ISTAT's been obviously initially it was social, and I think, look, I mean, one of the great things about this business is there's just a lot of interesting people, and I mean the relationships are as much, if not more, fun than the given deal because you forget about deals over time. So, and you know the challenges, the cross cultural experiences, all that, and ISTAT has reflected that, and it to ISTAT's credit, it's always been it was structured to be driven by the members, not by an outside source. I mean, although as it got big, I mean, you have to have that element, of course, but the content and the spirit of the organization has remained pretty true over the years, I think, and it's reflected, as Gerry was saying earlier, the changes in or Kostya, the changes in the industry.
How many people were at ISTAT when you were a director?
It was huge. I think we had 30. So it was an honor then. It didn't well we didn't email, so we couldn't even put out a platform. It was basically you got drafted. So
Okay. Gerry, how about yourself? Your experience with ISTAT and participation?
No, I agree with what Pete said. Look, a lot of this business is about relationships, and ISTAT and the conferences that ISTAT runs and everything is one of the best ways I know to really build those relationships. I think about Austin, for example, which must have been the last large conference of any kind before we all kind of went home. And
Hmm.
you think about, there's only so much that we can do. And I'm sitting in my home office in the basement of my house, and yeah, I'm being very productive. But without the opportunity to attend events like the ISTAT conferences, um, you know, over time, we just can't continue to conduct business this way. And ISTAT's been incredibly useful for that.
How did the two of you connect? Because I met both of you around the same time, and you were already playing together.
Um, I'll start. Well, Pete has a different view, I think, of how we
yeah,
met.
give me your side. And
Well, I think it goes back to the Continental bankruptcy 30 years ago when Pete was representing um, couple
Household.
of parties who were not happy about what we were proposing that they do. Um, and we worked through it because there's no deal I've ever seen where Pete's involved where you don't end up finding a solution. That's what's been great about Pete. But what I discovered in that process was, even though he was on the other side of the table, as soon as I could find a transaction where he could be on my side of the table, I would do that. And Pete's been working with us ever since.
Yeah. Well, in those same meetings in Continental where we did meet, I mean, I will say, I mean, Gerry was annoying because he read the contract, he wrote the contract, he knew what it said, and none of it was good for for a creditor. but he was always very even about it. It was not in your face. I mean, I would say, even though we got crushed, it was not an unpleasant experience. So that's,
Getting crushed by Gerry is a class act, huh? All
yeah.
right. Can you guys talk a bit about, because both of you have been around some extraordinary people in our industry in terms of their color, in terms of their salt, and in terms of their contribution to the industry. Gerry, maybe you could start. You had some great colleagues you're around to today.
No, absolutely. I mean, throughout my career, I mean, when I started working for the airline, at the time, I actually worked for Texas Air Corporation, which was the parent company of Continental, and that was Frank Lorenzo's company. And that was a really good place to start back in the 80s. And then in the 90s, in the mid 90s, probably, I don't know, I don't know if I want to call it the most legendary figure, but certainly one of the most, I would say, influential and really game-changing people I worked with was Gordon Bethune, who came into Continental at a time when we were heading downhill quickly, and within a very short period of time, really turned the airline around. I learned a lot from Gordon, and he just had some remarkable qualities. I've never seen anybody so quickly get the support of literally everybody in the company, frontline employees, managers, officers, were all aligned. And Gordon really effectively turned things around. And then more recently, a very similar situation with Oscar Munoz, who's now our executive chairman. When he came in as CEO 5 years ago, the same thing. These people just have this extraordinary impact on being able to change the culture of the airline. And for an airline, a lot of it's all about the culture of the company, and that's what makes the company work.
Thank you. And Pete, how about some
Well,
of the
actually,
stories of the characters? And your shopping list is quite long, I know.
yeah, and I'll do the abbreviated because there are, I mean, actually, interestingly enough, Gordon Bethune, who I agree with you, when he left PH&H in Baltimore, which was a very small ticket leasing company, he was out of a job, and I offered him space at Bristol, just an office, which we've always had spare offices, and which we've used as sort of a halfway house for the industry for people between opportunities. And he said, "Yeah, maybe I'll do that." And then he got a job at Boeing, which I guess he considered a better offer, so never used it. But there's probably three people that were. There's probably 20 people that I think about and shape how I view life. One was not a guy in the aviation business in ITEL, a guy named Jim Heath that I reported to. The only thing I remember is at one point he said, "Pete," and I was frustrated about something, worried about some deal, and he said, "Just remember that it's just a game. There's nothing in the rule book that prohibits you from having fun doing it. And the worst thing is you get fired. And it's not like they're cutting off your arms and legs." That perspective has helped me in many facets. over the years. Herb Kelleher, I mean, everybody loved Herb Kelleher. And I just remember, I basically saw Herb when he was drinking, and we were both smoking. So he and I and Crandall at the ISTAT things would go out and sneak cigarettes. And I remember at the ISTAT foundation thing, Herb, we were out on the patio smoking cigarettes, and Herb was throwing matches to see if he could hit the lounge chairs below. And all the kids wanted to meet him, all the scholarship students. So he went in and started out, and one of the kids said, well, what does it take to be a success? And Herb said, well, it really doesn't take much. He said, you guys have to learn early how to drink bourbon and smoke cigarettes. And then walked away. And then, there's characters like Udom in Thailand, Rich Wiley, who my favorite serial platform flipper. I mean, I don't remember the deals other than the people I had fun with doing deals, frankly. I mean, it goes back to it. It's people.
Well, shifting a little bit from people to times, and what were some of the either most difficult deals or difficult periods in your life professionally that you had to navigate, and how you worked through insanity and humor? Pete, maybe we'll start with you.
Yeah, well, the most difficult years were years 1 through 3, and to be honest, I mean, something like this year, it's a challenge, just because the market is basically frozen until people get some clarity. But I think we'll talk about that later. But it's also one of the, today. I mean, it's last 10 years it was a capital markets game. And it was frankly fairly easy to sell airplanes, particularly with leases attached. And it was more about basis points than hardware. So in that kind of market, we had to reinvent ourselves because people don't hire us when it's easy. So, but we did see a gap. I mean, fortunately, we'd already developed the relationship with United, and we did other airline business, which for airlines that had a surge requirement to dispose of subfleets. And that allowed us to keep a business, but the core business of financial institution was very tough. And now it's getting better. So
You like tough times, huh?
well, that's when people need us.
Gerry, how about yourself? Any
Well,
particular
it turns
period
out
that
in this
stands out?
business that you have to like tough times to stay in this business. As it turns out, as much as we had hoped, at least from a U.S. airline industry perspective, that times have changed, as it turns out, about once every 10 years or so, the industry does have a crisis. And, this is clearly the worst crisis that the airline industry has seen. And it's almost like all the prior crises, which have been bad, are merely a build-up to this one. And all the learnings that we've gone through from all the prior crises are really helping us get through this one. But, I think about, even when I started in the 80s, when when industry was trying to deal with deregulation, and you had the winners and losers back in the 80s. In the 90s, well, at Continental, we had our own crisis that we fixed on our own when Gordon came in. But then we had 9/11, then the financial crisis, and each of those helped get us ready. Unfortunately, and maybe we'll talk about this later, nobody could have predicted anything like this with the impact that it's having on the industry. But one thing I've told some of the young people in my organization, that this is actually a great thing for them personally, because it's how you learn. It's how we all learned back in the over the years on how to manage through difficult times. You have to do that. Best to do it as a youngster because you have a lot of runway left. But yeah, this is an industry that just has to always deal with something happening.
Fair enough. Well, maybe we'll transition from historical perspectives to the current reality. We looked at the past difficult times, and maybe let's start by both of you outlining how you see our current predicament and how do we navigate the near term of the challenges before us. And Gerry, clearly you are in the eye of the storm in terms of implications of people not flying and then starting to unlock the economies and the possible effect of the economy after you get at the medical. I'll cede the floor to you, please.
I missed a little bit of what you said, but
Yeah.
yeah, for us, it's about liquidity and being able to outlast the problem. And personally, I mean, we all have views on when we think things will start, materially improving. But for me and the leaders at United, we are preparing for a situation where we really don't see the recovery until there's a vaccine that's widely available. We could be wrong about that, but we need to be prepared for that. And in this business, and it's always been true, it's all about cash. It's all about liquidity. And so we have been focused on building our liquidity to last until there's a vaccine. We set a target by the end of the third quarter of having over $17 billion of liquidity. Basically, that would last us in a situation, and we're not in that situation today, but if we were back in the situation we saw ourselves in April and May, where essentially there was no new net booking. So, we had people buying tickets, but that was effectively being offset by people wanting refunds. So no new net bookings, no new net sort of passenger revenue, focusing on then minimizing cash burn and having that liquidity to get us beyond when anybody would reasonably think there would be a widely available vaccine. And we've accomplished that. In fact, when I think back on some of the more memorable transactions I've been involved in, I always go back actually to one of the early EETCs that we did back in 1997, which was the first pre-funded EETC. It was taking a structure which was just beginning and finding a way to use it as a very effective tool to finance a large fleet acquisition program where we can raise, $1 billion at a time to finance aircraft that are coming from the manufacturers. And that structure has been used now for almost 25 years as the primary way in which U.S. airlines, anyway, have financed large fleet acquisitions. The transaction we did last week actually is equally important, I think, to the industry going forward. For the first time, we were able to raise a substantial amount of liquidity, in fact, $6.8 billion, which in this environment, what's remarkable is that I believe is the largest single debt capital raise by an airline in history. And essentially using our frequent flyer program, Mileage Plus, essentially is collateral in a very innovative structure to raise, a lot of cash. But that was a key transaction to getting us to the 17 billion. So, where necessity is the mother of invention, just like 25 years ago, the EETC solved a problem of how a non-investment grade airline can access the investment grade markets in a significant way to finance aircraft at a very cost effective way. We've come up with a similar solution on how to borrow a substantial amount of money using one of our best assets, which is our frequent flyer program. Anyway, so we're comfortable. We're going to hit our liquidity target, and we're prepared.
Okay. And how do you see the evolution of the crisis from a perspective of medical versus the economic impact on the airline industry, or you see that all as one different?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Medical issues, well, you talked about the vaccine versus the economic impact. The economy clearly affects demand for aircraft. Do you see them interrelated, or do you see that first we solve the medical issue and we have the vaccine, and then we deal with the difficulties of the economy, or just one long
All right,
two-year
it's all
period?
related. I think, look, people have to get comfortable flying, and not just getting on airplanes, which we believe, is very safe. It's mandatory in the U.S. That for us and other airlines, you wear masks on board. The ventilation systems are terrific on airplanes. We are doing a lot of cleaning. Just like after 9/11, where the focus was on security, now the focus is on cleanliness and providing a healthy environment. I don't know if either you have flown. I flew a couple weeks ago, and I have to say everybody was very well behaved, and I think it worked out great. And people will just have to get comfortable with that. But you also have the issue of where are you traveling to? A good example is what's going on now in some of the states that were not the original states that had significant cases. Florida, Texas, Arizona, are experiencing what New York and some other states experienced 3 months ago. And you can see that in the bookings that people suddenly aren't as anxious to go down to Florida as they were a month ago. Just like back in April, people weren't real anxious to go to New York. So it's not just about the experience of flying; it's about what's going on in the places that you want to visit.
And Pete, how do you see from a trading perspective? How has your world changed in the pandemic?
Well, Kostya, like Gerry, I'm proud to say that Bristol has raised $167,000 in the payroll protection program. So I think we're good. No, look, a market like this is, it's one reason I continue to do it. It's interesting. It's unclear. It's markets like today where there's lack of clarity, negative views of the business, asset values. It's high risk, high return, and as I remember talking to Gerry down in Austin, and I said, you guys got a lot of cash. This at that point shouldn't be a problem, and Gerry hit it right on the head. He said it's all about duration, and if this thing until people feel there's a path out of it. Not that it's already gotten better, but there's a path out of it where you can put some sort of timing to that path. The lack of clarity stays out there. But what happens in markets? The trading market, for example, in the widebody side, was already bad. Had been bad for a year. And values had dropped significantly, and have dropped even more, which tends to happen. In a declining market, widebodies get punished well below their true utility, and in a rising market, they get a premium because it takes a while, because there's demand for seats, and the new aircraft spigot you can't just turn on and off, and it takes a while when demand picks up, the supply tends to trail. So, we look at it. We think there's opportunity to both make and lose money. And some of it, there's certainly capital looking for outsized spreads, but I think you've got to be able to bracket your risk and manage your risk, because in risk return, there's no magic to risk return. I mean, if you're looking for a 20% yield, you have the risk of a problem. That's all. And
Is your
then it
phone
gets
ringing
to
up or a similar rhythm?
what's that?
Is your phone ringing off the hook with people looking to for help trading?
Well, right. What it starts, and it's what's happened in everyone. It starts with, I think, people who have come back in, whether it's private equity, people that are risk oriented and yield oriented. They'll talk to people like us and others about, as they try to bracket the value of the A tranche or double ETC and the B tranche and the E notes if they still exist. So we won't get business till 20. Even if we got business today, that has to run its course. The failures, you have to wait for the renegotiations, which always start with the existing carrier. And when those fail, the answer is yes, we're getting, I mean, the issue though is it's such an illiquid market right now, even getting, if you gave us an assignment today, everything's placeable at a number. No plane is not placeable, but the numbers are so ugly today that, you're probably, certainly the airlines have leverage, I think, in terms of recutting. So you have to make a decision post-COVID on the airline itself. And there's some you'd bet on and some you're smarter just to get out of now. But that's starting to happen. Fall is when it really kicks in, when people see what did or didn't happen in the summer.
But a reminder to everybody, you can ask questions and people can vote on those questions. And we have some good questions rolling in. One is for Pete. Pockets of opportunity that you see today or around the corner in aircraft markets.
I think for today placements, very few, unless, it could be a late model NG at a great price. I think, even Gerry for the perfect deal would spend some of that 17 billion on, a couple of 5 or 10 great airplanes. but there are people that would. There still seems to be some financing out there. But the pockets we're seeing are things like the Embraer, the 145, that passenger favorite. But you know what? It's cheap, and there's always somebody that thinks they can start an airline and not make the same mistakes. And thank God they're out there. And I think there's kind of a COVID. There's people see opportunity in COVID. So cheap assets like a 145, which is $1.5 million or at best, versus a $10 million airplane. You can get a whole fleet for certainly to do proof of concept. And I think you'll see activity in sort of that kind of the bottom half of the market, or the new entrant, if you will, that could get financing on their own investor credit.
So the lead of the day is 145s.
Well, if people will release them.
Very true. And Gerry, there's a question for you.
He's talking to me, since I think we have the most of any airline, don't we, Pete? You
do, and you have XRs, which are there. Those are the most sought after. So, so we're trying to extract some.
The United corner of the market, and that's the opportunity. Yeah. Gerry, there's a question for you in terms of long haul flight, and will they be disproportionately affected relative to more regional flying? And does the long haul market recover slower because of the mask requirement or because of the cleaning or the concerns. How are you thinking long haul versus regional flying?
I think international long haul will take a while just because of people's willingness. Well, first of all, countries' willingness to open their borders, and then people's willingness to travel overseas, in a time of uncertainty. I think the mask issue is probably secondary to that. I think it's partly about getting a comfortable mask. I mean, I've tried a number of different masks and found ones I like and wouldn't mind wearing them for a number of hours. I'm not sure the mask issue is going to be the biggest concern, but until we get the borders reopened and people willing to fly across borders, I think it's going to take a while for that market to really come back.
Mm-hmm. And how do we think about aircraft utilization in the world where we need to have more cleaning, maybe a more difficult boarding to make sure everybody's wearing masks? Will the utilization be sustainable because it was at record high levels? And clearly, does it impact the low-cost carriers, which are so dependent on high utilization? Gerry, maybe your perspective on this?
I suppose at the margin, it will take a little bit longer between flights to clean. As we move to a world where we're going to clean between flights, I'm not sure it will be a material impact on utilization. And I don't think the boarding process really slows down that much. What we're doing now is the old-fashioned way. You go from back to front, and that's always been an efficient way to board an airplane. And again, as people get used to the masks, it does become second nature to put on a mask. I mean, it's the same thing you do when you go to a supermarket today. So there could be a marginal impact. I don't think it'll be that great.
Okay. Pete, how about in your world in terms of trading value? Where Gerry asked an interesting question when we were preparing for this. Can you move a wide body today? Can you move an A330 300 or a 777-300ER?
Again, well, the answer is yes. I mean, we have moved actually one A330 about 4 weeks ago, and we've got another one closing on mid-July, about 2 weeks. So, I mean, it's doable. I mean, the numbers are ugly. So, I mean, it's. But the numbers, as I said, on the wide bodies had already been punished quite a bit. So the delta from I think the values in a lot of the vehicles were somewhat overstated, and I can't tell you where bottom is. I mean, the market will tell you. I mean, look. What we do, Kostya, is we're like a center fielder out there waiting for somebody to hit a problem airplane out, and then we run and try to catch it and go place it. And you only in this kind of market you find out, what's placeable and what's not. I mean, it's but I think you will see some further dampening of demand, I think, in the fall, regardless of what happens.
The airplanes that you're trading now or placing now, really, if you were doing that 6 months ago, the value decline is 5%, 10%?
Probably 15.
So quite a bit. And you anticipate more value pressure through fall or after?
My crystal ball, I mean, we're spot market guys, so we're ready and we watch the market and we move when we see opportunity. So, you've got to, it's tougher to market any airplane right now, obviously. And I think you've got to, and what we've told people is in this kind of market, until you get some clarity, you need, probably 9 to 12 months on a narrow body and up to 18 on a wide body. I mean, you can short circuit that, but the pricing is ugly, and you're probably smarter, to start the process, but wait, do it in an orderly fashion rather than a snap sale.
Gerry, and you have been managing fleets for both Continental and United. How do you think your outlook for what a fleet for United should look in the future? How are those views affected due to the pandemic? Have they changed much, or you just postpone deliveries and get capacity in the balance and keep doing?
I think it's too soon to tell. If you think about our business in two parts, the domestic short haul, international long haul, the dynamics on those two, I think, are going to be a little bit different. As I said earlier, I think international will take longer to recover. Between our mainline narrow body fleet and our regional fleet flown by our regional partners, we have a fair amount of flexibility on sizing that fleet to domestic demand, and we're actually doing that right now on a month-to-month basis. And we'll continue to do that until things stabilize. Longer term, what's going to be the right number of wide body aircraft that we are going to need? Time will tell on that. We certainly have a lot of wide body aircraft right now, and a few more still coming. 787s, which are just terrific aircraft in this, particularly in this environment. So time will tell. Is it likely that for the next several years this industry will be a smaller industry? Absolutely. So there will be aircraft that continue to be either subject to low utilization or even parked for a period of time. But over some number of years, everything will start to ramp back up.
Over the past decade, we've seen small airplanes get bigger. The A320 up a lot of moved up to A321, and with MAX 8 moving up to 9 and 10. There was a lot of debate pre-pandemic that right-sized aircraft may not be as big as what people were ordering. Do you have a view of whether that trend continues, that regional airplanes or 320s and 321s are keep getting bigger, or will they shrink due to lower demand in the smaller industry?
I'll start. Yeah, sure. So, certainly near term, smaller. The smaller aircraft have kind of seen a resurgence in use. Certainly in the spring and going into the summer. Again, it's going to be a function of the speed at which that demand picks up, and when we get back to 2017, 2018, 2019 levels of demand will dictate some of that.
Pete, how about you? How do you think about the 320 and MAX families? Bigger or smaller?
Well, I mean, I think, there's a lot of users, so there's decent liquidity in the aftermarket. But the question is always price. I think, obviously, as the MAX fly, I mean, there's a home, but the numbers, I think, will continue to deteriorate for the NGs, for the kind of the 10-year-old airplanes, which is natural. I mean, it's what's always happened, frankly. I think there's a lot of gunpowder stored for the big airlines that, as traffic comes back, I mean, it's not like they've got to go out. They can just go to the desert for their own airplanes and increase capacity. Not always the case, but that's sort of generally thing. I think I would. I guess the answer. I don't think it's clear. I mean, until you get clarity on how this thing evolves, because what happens is once you get clarity, then the psychology turns from negative in terms of the buy side to either indifferent or mildly positive. You want to get, if you think traffic really is going to start improving at some where you can put a bandwidth around that rate, then you might go out and add some assets, particularly at the kind of the bottom three quarters of the market to, if the pricing is good and the psychology is there, the big part of it.
Okay. Jerry, interesting question came in for you. Using passenger airplanes for cargo. How are you doing that today, or are you doing it today? And how extensively, and how long do you think that lasts?
Um, well, actually, we're using a number of our international wide-body aircraft really for cargo. That's really the primary use in some markets right now, on trans-Pacific and some transatlantic markets, using them for cargo. And then in some cases, we are carrying passengers, and that's just adding on. But the flights actually work just with the cargo demand. There's the need to move a fair amount of cargo. So we are doing some of that, and that part of the business actually is working quite nice. It's a relatively small part of our business, so it doesn't make up for the lost passenger revenue, but our cargo business actually has grown through this.
And you see doing that for next year or so, or just play it day by day?
For as long as demand continues, we'll continue to do that.
And Pete, there's a question for you coming in that if you were a big buyer of aircraft in 2018 and 2019, how long would you have to sit on them to get back to those values that you bought them at?
Well, I think you're in a lease only mode. I mean,
But is it a 2 year thing or is it a 1 year thing?
well, I think the younger, well, what you hope, I mean, there's two sides to the 2018, 2019 deliveries, and that's who you delivered to. I mean, if there's, value, I mean, if they're a double ETC, I mean, to some airlines, that's it. Not only is it attractive financing, they may look for a haircut, but it's a younger airplane, still under warranty, et cetera. You'd probably be best served, and the airline would probably have an interest. If they don't, then you're you're going to take a haircut, but you've got a longer life to recoup with the airplane. So, I mean,
No timeline, hang in there.
yeah.
Right. Yeah, we do that a little bit differently, because for us, whether or not we take an impairment on a particular aircraft is a function of what we consider to be the long-term cash flow from that aircraft. So, we wouldn't take into account some short-term blip like we have right now if we still believe over time that aircraft is going to generate the cash flow to support the value of the aircraft.
Makes sense. Let's transition a bit and use your experience and wisdom in guiding the younger folks that have only recently entered the industry and are saying, whoa, how did I get here? You started earlier, Gerry, by saying that incredible learning opportunity. Can you expand on that and how you survive and look at this industry in the long term?
Sure. And first, I do want to apologize to, for example, the interns that United was hoping to hire this summer. We had to, as many companies did this summer, cancel the internship program. We also have college graduates who were expecting to come in to entry-level positions, and that's been postponed, which is unfortunate. But we are going through a process right now of reducing management headcount by about roughly 30%. So it is a little bit tough, but to the extent that people have jobs, as I said earlier, this is the best learning experience. If you can, cut your teeth on a challenging time like this and learn how to manage through it, it's going to make the rest of your career that much easier, and will prepare you inevitably for the next downturn. This is, to the extent a job is available, this is just one of the best times to get involved in the industry.
I would second that. I mean, it's if you can get the job, even if it's not the perfect job, start now, because I mean, there's no better learning than in a distressed market. And among the things you learn is when you're doing a lease document and there's a default section. It's one thing to argue, let the lawyers argue back and forth, but if you've been through it, you understand what giving on a point could mean out, in a market like this. I mean, the people are much better that have been through something like this are much better at negotiating leases on the front end, and on both sides, frankly. I mean, but if you start now, I mean, number one, it starts you off with some humility, which I think is a good thing to have in this business. And as Gerry said, it gives you some insight as to why various deals have gone bad. And once the market turns, you've got a great set of experiences and skills that will have developed.
And are there still those empty offices at Bristol that Gordon Bethune used that the United Insurance can use?
Well, no, Airlink's in all of them, which is great.
Okay.
I mean,
Very good. Well, thank you for that wisdom. And we got a few more interesting questions coming in. Yesterday, there was somewhat of a heated discussion during the congressional hearings about booking of the middle seat. Gerry, do you have a view of how the airlines will manage the public relations around density in the aircraft in the current environment?
Yeah, we obviously are sensitive to that, and making sure people understand that all the steps that the airlines are taking to create a safe environment are really helpful. Enforcing the mask policy, for example, the cleaning that's done, the limited service, all the things that we're doing to impact that. And then also notifying customers that, if a flight is going to be a fuller flight, let them know ahead of time. And if they want to change to a different flight, they can do that. So, we'll manage through that. There's no perfect answer, but communication, I think, is the best thing we can do, so people understand what to expect before they get on a flight.
Very good. I think we are mostly addressed the questions. There's a question that is more of a statement that thanks you and ISTAT for your role in historical ISTAT creation of the foundation, and how the foundation is currently supporting the COVID-19 humanitarian response. That ISTAT organization made a significant donation. Airlink is strongly supported and is also active. So thank you for your past and current board membership, and the work that ISTAT board and the organization is doing on behalf of its members for the broader community in the context of our current environment. With that, what I'd like to do is maybe give you gentlemen a floor for any last words, thoughts that you have before we wrap this up. Maybe start with you, Gerry.
I don't know if I have that much to add. This is obviously um, unprecedented times. We've learned a lot. We've learned that the video conferencing technology has certainly improved over the years, but still not perfect. And if anything, should encourage people to go that face to face makes a difference. I mean, the one thing for those of us that have been around for a long time, we have our relationships, and having to be in the same room as Pete, not sure there's any big advantage to that. Although there would be an advantage to go grab a scotch, I guess. But the problem is both in developing new relationships, and more importantly for a company like United, where you need to have that physical presence to really train the next generation. There's only so long we can do this remotely. So people will get back to work. People will start traveling again, and as soon as it's proven to be a safe environment to get back to normal, I'm sure the world will get back to normal, and we're looking forward to that.
Okay, thank you, Gerry. Pete, how about any last words from you?
No, I mean, I agree with Gerry. I mean, the one thing that is great about Zoom or Microsoft Teams, any of these things, is at least I don't think you're going to do a lot of deals this way, frankly. And Gerry, I mean, in our business, you got to get out in front of people, and some of them don't even have computers. So, but it is also in this period, it's a good way it's better than a phone call in terms of interacting with people you already know. And we've spent a lot of time I've touched bases with people I haven't talked to in a long time. And I'm glad I did. I mean, just on a personal level, and it all becomes cumulative. I mean, and it's interesting. I mean, it's interesting times. Everybody's going to get an opportunity to get creative, and and it'll end. So, I mean, it'll get better, and everybody will have forgot about the 1918 pandemic.
Well, it'll be a long time before we forget it, but you guys are unforgettable. So thank you very much for making the time today and sharing the stories and insights. Take care.
Hey, Kostya, thanks for hosting.
Yeah, thank you,
Appreciate
Kostya.
it. And a comment for the broader audience. We plan to have many of these chats to come, so please monitor the istat.org site. And we also have the Learning Lab, where we are putting some of the materials that we've developed in terms of ISTAT education platform. That's also fascinating for people that may be interested in honing some of their skills. So check out the website and see all the cool things that we're doing while we cannot in person get together. With that, take care and thank you for joining us.